9.4, writing quadratic equations from graphs and/or solutions. Here we go. Before we kind of get started here on the notes, I need to show you guys something. So I made up a couple of quick examples for you to look at. We have 3 examples here, and I want y'all to make some connections. Here's the equation, here's the graph. Right? Here's the equation, here's the graph, you get it. Whoops. So let's think critically here for a sec. I see that my equation has x minus 1 and minus 6. But then I see a positive 1 for a 0 and a positive 6 for a 0. Look at the other examples. Is that true for these as well? Yeah, look, I got a positive 1 and a positive 5, but I'm looking at a negative 1 and a negative 5. They're both opposite signs. Okay, let's do one more. Look, this has one of each. A positive 3 in my equation, but then on my graph it's a negative 3 for a 0. A negative 4 for my equation, but on my graph it's a positive 4 for the equation. Why do you think that is? And I'm going to tell you that's always the case when you have a factored form of a quadratic and are looking at its graph. It's always the opposite. What's going on here? All right, well, let's kind of think critically for a second, y'all. Think about it. Let's look at this example right here. This point is at 1, 0. Okay, so when x is 1, y is 0. Look at my equation here. What what do I get if I use a 1 right here? 1 minus 1, that gives me a 0. Oh, so what's going on here is your graph plugs in the x's, and the x that makes this a 0 is positive 1. All right, so that's why this relationship exists of opposites. Think about it. On my graph, I see that 6 makes the graph equal 0. So my equation has to be x minus 6, right? So that 6 minus 6 could give me 0. So it's all about how to make zeros. So when we're looking at the examples today, instead of just memorizing change of signs, think about the fact that when you plug in the numbers on the graph you see hitting 0, you should get 0 from the equations that we write. Let's take a look. Alrighty, for the purpose of this lesson, we're not figuring out a. So a is just given to us, negative 0.5. And let's look at our graph here. We're going to write it in factored form. Hopefully by now you're associating factored form with parentheses, right? And let's take a look here at our graph. We've got a 0 here at negative 6 and negative 2. All right, so negative 6 and negative 2. Negative 6 and negative 2. So let's go ahead and let's write our equation. We know, or at least we're kind of used to seeing just x's in the front right here. These are kind of simple ones. X is just in the front. But then what do I write after that? What do I write after that? Let's see here. What minus 6? Let's see, I'll fix these here. All right, well, negative 6 is supposed to give me 0. When I use negative 6 as x, I'm supposed to get a 0. So if I use negative 6 as x, how am I going to get a 0? If I put a plus 6. All right, let me do a different color for this, see if it helps. All right, if I put a plus 6. So again, if you want to remember to just change the signs, you can. But remember, the big idea is because you're making 0. Right, again, apparently negative 2 for x gives me a 0. Okay, well that's gotta be because when I add 2, it gives me 0. So my equation is going to be x with a positive 6 and x with a positive 2. And if we would, and you definitely should be doing this, we should be checking in our calculator. I'm going to type it in exactly as I see it. So I'm going to type in the negative 0.5 parentheses x plus 6 and x plus 2. And then we definitely want to make sure that what we see in our calculator matches what we see on our paper. And that's a real easy way for us to check our answer. All right, perfect. Right, I got a negative 2 and a negative 6, just like I see on my paper, so I know that I've written an equivalent, a valid equation. Let's take a look at the next one. The next one's asking us to write our equation in standard form. Okay, well, we may not remember, but hopefully we do. Standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. But it's clearly kind of set up for me to start with factored form. So let's do what we did last time. We see that we have a 0 here at -2 and +4. -2 and +4. And then x is just, or a is just 1, which means we don't even really have to write it. So if I've got x and x, what values could I put after that to make sure I get a 0? Right? Because apparently when x is -2, I get 0. So what will give me 0? -2 plus 2. Perfect. All right, apparently when x is 4, I get 0. So that must mean x minus 4 is my equation. If what I'm saying doesn't make sense, again, just remember, change the sign, you're good to go. All right, so this is factored form, but they didn't want factored form from me. They wanted standard form. Let's make a quick note here that this is factored form. All right, but they wanted standard form. So how do I get from this to standard form? Multiply, right? Foiling, box method. We actually learned a bunch of ways to do this. I'm going to do the box method because that's what the majority of my students prefer. So we got x and 2, we got x and -4, we multiply, we get x squared, we get 2x, we get -4x, and we get -8. Let's write those out. X squared, you know what, I'm going to do that down here. We had x squared with a +2x and a -4x and a -8. So we're going to combine like terms, and we're going to end up with x squared and a -2x minus 8. Okay? And again, you could easily check this answer in your calculator. Right? I'm going to do the final answer because it asked me for standard form. So x squared minus 2x minus 8. And let's look and see if it matches what we see on our paper. Yeah, it does, right? We got a -2, 0 and a +4, 0, just like we see on our paper. Awesome. All right, last two. Here we go. If a is 1, write the equation for the graph with solutions. X equals -1, 3 in factored form. So factored form is great. It just means I've got my parentheses. It says a is 1. That just goes right in the front, which you don't even have to write if it's 1. And then we've got our x's here. All right, so apparently when x is -1, I get a 0. Those are my solutions, right? So -1, it's got to be +1 will give me a 0. Change the sign. And then again, 3 is giving me a 0, which means that I've got to have a -3 in my equation. Or, like I said, if you just want to remember, change the signs, do that. Perfect. All right, here's my equation. I can quickly check this. Now, I don't have a graph to compare it to, but what I can do is I can just make sure that it's matching what it's supposed to be doing in my description. So in y equals, we're going to quickly type in the answer that we got, which was x plus 1 and x minus 3. And let's take a look at the graph, and let's make sure my solutions are where they're supposed to be. Right, my solutions are supposed to be at -1 and 3. -1 and 3, perfect, right? So easy to check. If you guys are not checking your answers, you are really doing yourself a disservice. Okay, last problem, here we go. If a is 2, write the equation for the graph with x-intercepts, -9, 0, and 5, 0, in standard form. Well, we're going to start with factored form because it's so much easier, all right, from this description we've been given. So we're going to do our x's. And then we're going to notice that if I use a -9, I'm supposed to get a 0. So it's got to be a +9 in my equation. And apparently when I use 5 for x, I get a 0, so it's got to be -5. So again, change the signs, change the signs. The 2 just goes right in the front like that. So this is my factored form. Now if I want standard form, that means I've got to deal with these parentheses. I've got to multiply everything out. So I'm going to quickly do my box method here. And don't worry about the 2. Just use what's in the parentheses here. And I've got x squared, I've got 9x, I've got -5x, and I've got -45. So I've got y equals 2, but now I've got x squared, +9x, -5x, and a -45. So all we got to do to finish this thing is just kind of clean it up. So we've got y equals 2. We've got x squared. We're going to combine these to make +4x and then a -45. And finally, to multiply out that 2. So I get 2x squared plus 8x and -90. So this is my final standard form equation. And again, we can quickly check our answer. We're going to type in 2x squared plus 8x minus 90. And we're going to just make sure that it matches our description. Looks like, okay, negative 9, 0 and 5, 0, just like it told me I was supposed to have. Perfect. So I know that I'm probably correct. All right. Takeaway from this lesson, y'all, the big idea is that you're making 0 when you write your equation. If that was a little too complicated, you can just remember, change those signs. Y'all change those signs.